Okay, I now declare the May 2025 Council meeting open at 6:30 p.m. and welcome all those in attendance. I now invite Councillor Barber to read the acknowledgement to country.
The City of Melville acknowledges the Bibbulmun people as the traditional custodians of the land on which the city stands today and pays its respect to the Wadjuk people and elders, both past and present.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. I now draw your attention to the disclaimer on the screen. The affirmation of civic duty and responsibility on the screen. The advice of audio-visual live streaming and recording on the screen. Item 2, attendance and apologies. We have the following councillors attending electronically. In fact, we don't have any attending electronically, but we do have 2 councillors providing an apology for this evening. That's Councillor Lim and Councillor Ross. And finally, we have no councillors on leave of absence. Item 3, declarations by members. We now move on to declarations by members. Are there any declarations by members who have not read and given due consideration to all matters contained in the business papers presented before the meeting? Nil. Declarations by members who have received and not read the elected members' bulletin? Nil. Moving on to item 4, announcements by the presiding member. Approved deputations. 1 deputation has been approved for tonight's meeting from Mr Kenny of Applecross in relation to item UP 2568, review of local planning policy, 1.6 parking and access. I will call you forward prior to the discussion of this item to make your deputation to council. Approved written submissions. Additionally, no written submissions have been approved for this evening. Item 5, disclosure of interest. Can the Head of Governance please advise if there are any disclosures of interest for this evening? Thank you, Ms Newman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, we have a disclosure of interest from Councillor Barber in relation to item E2568, response to petition, Burke Drive traffic calming strategy. Councillor Barber is declaring a proximity interest and will leave the meeting. We also have a disclosure of interest from CEO Ms Bowman in relation to item C25272, confidential employee matter. Ms Bowman is declaring an impartiality interest and will remain in the meeting. Thank you.
Are there any further disclosures from elected members? All right, moving on to public question time. I now open public question time at 6:33 p.m. Are there any public questions? We do have a number of questions that have been received with notice this evening, and if we have any question here tonight to ask, would you please make your way forward? I don't see anybody who is here in addition to the deputy. So if there's no one in the audience to ask the question and the question is not taken on notice, the question and response will be provided in the minutes, which will be available to the public on Friday, 23 May. So we do not have any of those present who have suggested they may be here. So I will, if there's no public questions, I will declare question time over at 6:34. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, awards and presentations. There are no awards or presentations for this evening. Applications for new leave of absence. Councillor Lim has submitted a request for leave of absence for a period of 2 weeks at the end of May, and Councillor Ross has submitted a request for leave of absence for 6 weeks in June and July. Are there any further requests? If there are no further requests, I need a mover and seconder for the motion. Councillor Wheatland, seconded Councillor Barber. Any voice to the contrary? I declare that carried. Item 9, confirmation of minutes. 9.1, ordinary meeting of the Council, 15th of April. Can I please have a mover and seconder? for the council minutes. Thank you. Councillor Lee moved and seconded. Councillor Edinger, any voice to the contrary? Anyone opposed? I declare it carried. 9.2, ordinary meeting of the Governance Committee, 5th of May. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Mover and seconder for the governance. Thank you. Councillor Woodall, seconder Councillor Edinger. Is there anyone opposed? If not, I declare it carried. 9.3, ordinary meeting of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee, 12th of May. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Spanbrook, seconder Councillor Robbins. Anyone opposed? I declare it carried. 9.4, notes of the agenda briefing forum, 13 May. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Spanbrook moved. And Councillor Edinger seconded. Anybody opposed? Okay, I declare that carried. Item 10, new business of an urgent nature. There is no new business of an urgent nature. Item 11, identification of matters for which the meeting may be closed. Item C25-272, confidential employee matter, has been identified as confidential. I will hold this item to the end of the meeting so we can move to go behind closed doors. Now, additionally, the following items have been identified as having confidential attachments. That is item C25-269-410 Canning Highway, Attadale, commercial optimisation investigation with a confidential attachment, and C25-270-788-794 Canning Highway, Applecross, commercial optimisation investigation. It also has a confidential attachment. These items are proposed to be considered en bloc, and should elected members wish to discuss the confidential attachments, I will also hold these until the end of the meeting and will call for a motion to go behind closed doors. Item 12, petitions. There are no petition items for consideration this evening. Number 13, adoption of recommendations en bloc. We now move to the en bloc items for this evening. The following items have been recommended to be carried en bloc.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've only just seen this email, like literally just then, and I would actually like us to vote separately on items C25, 269 and 270. Thank you.
Oh, so the two of the confidential attachments you would like removed from the en bloc items. Okay, thank you very much. So we're now voting on the item C25, 266 investment statements for March, 267 schedule of accounts paid for March, UP 2567 review of local planning policy 1.4 provision of public art in development proposals. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Councillor Fitzgerald moved. Seconded. Councillor Wheatland. Is there any opposed? I declare that carried. Reports. Item 14. I now move on to items for this evening. First, I would like to bring forward UP 2568, review of the local planning policy 1.6, parking and access. Prior to tabling the item, I would like to ask Mr Kenny to come forward to the microphone and provide his deputation. You have 10 minutes, Mr Kenny, with a further 5 minutes for questions. Please keep to your time frame. We have a busy agenda. Thank you. No, a red light should appear. Yeah. Is it going on? Is it on?
Oh, that one. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councillors and CEO and staff. Yeah, this presentation is really about safety in the community, and I'll go through some of the issues surrounding local planning policy 1.6. If I could have the third slide, please. Yeah, that one. Yep, this is a list of 10 developments within the City of Melville, and all those developments did not comply with their planning approvals, which is quite a serious non-compliance. If I go to the next page, please. There's another further 16 developments here, and of those developments, all of them, and the first 10, do not comply with local planning policy 5.6. Now, why is that? Well, I think this is a very serious matter, and you could have to say that local planning policy, 1.6, did not safeguard community safety as it was supposed to do. Third page, please. Oh, next page, sorry. Yeah. Transport and impact and parking assessments are part of the RAR process. Of the 12 of these developments that went to JDAP, with the transport impact statements, 1 reported a non-compliance, and that was ignored. 4 reported compliance with the Australian standard, and they were not. 5 reports did not even discuss the interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. Very shortcomings, thank you. Of the development plans that went to RARs, 9 had drawings that were not compatible with the proposed planning conditions, but they still went ahead. 2 others specified plans to be as per the approved plans, but they were not in accordance with local planning policy 1.6. Next point. Ms Weir reported on this and said, well, the city needs to do something about it because they're in a serious situation if it continues. The city assured Ms Weir that they would do something about it. To my knowledge, no planning directions have been issued to rectify any of these infringements. Thank you. Following Ms Weir's report, there have been a number of approvals that do not meet the undertakings the city gave to Ms Weir. 2 buildings permits have been issued with non-compliant driveways. A certificate of compliance has been issued with a non-compliance driveway. How did it get that far? 2 RARs have been submitted to JDAP with non-compliance driveways, and they were approved. Next, thanks. Just look quickly at the regulation. Under the Planning and Development Act, local governments may issue and direct corrections to contraventions of their planning scheme. And failure to comply with the planning scheme is an offence. And the Minister can impose severe penalties. Thanks. Now, if we also look at the planning and development regulations, they're quite different. Under Schedule 1 of these regulations, it allows for arcades to be varied on a case-by-case basis by the local government after due consideration. That's fine. Schedule 2 says, and it deals with local planning policies, that any variation in local planning policies must be approved by the WA Planning Commission. Now, local planning policies is a bit of a misnomer because they are not aspirational policies like political policies are. In fact, they are virtually mandatory because they're done under the regulations and they're part of the local planning scheme which must be followed. Then also, I should point out, there's 2 local planning policies that deal with variations from the R codes. Now, I don't know if local planning policy 3.1 has been approved by WAPC. I've tried to find out, I don't know. Similarly, 1.6, as it stands at the moment, has not, well, I don't know whether it's been approved by WAPC, but the city has this time sent the draft for approval to WAPC. Next, thanks. Now, R codes. Now, I'm not really going to discuss the R codes except to say that in Volume 2, for parking and access, it says it must be safe. Now, what does that mean? Safe for a developer and safe for the Australian standard, I imagine, would be 2 completely different things. The city has decided that all those developments should be according to the Australian standard, which I think is commendable. Next, thanks. Now, some of the issues that were not covered were in the draft were obscured sightlines through a neighbour's fence, Riviera, 36 Quintal. The sightlines are through the neighbour's fence. The neighbour's got a hedge there, you can't see a thing. And 82A and B McLeod, Now, with their own property, 9 Wilcox has got a very steep ramp and it's got a hedge right beside the ramp when it comes up. And again, the driver is a metre below where he should be. He's only at footpath level as he comes up and he can't see a thing. 8 Macrae Road was approved originally with obscured sightlines. Actually, it was built with obscured sightlines, I should say. Now, crossovers. And here, I look at 1 Davenport. And what you see at 1 Davenport, if you look at the top photograph there, you'll see retaining walls on both sides of the crossover. The crossover is actually cut into the verge. That's a free hit for the builder. He gets all that extra space, and the ratepayers of Melville get nothing. They lose proper access to that verge.
I just remind you, you've got 3 minutes left.
Okay. Now, and that one development also has a office down the bottom. You come out of the office, no sight lines, and you have to walk up the sideway. No good. Now, lot 110 Fiona Wood Drive and 8 Macrae Road were both approved with cuts into the driveway. Now, document control, I think that I won't go there. Now, historically, the next one, variations. Variations are required to be analysed under this draft, but they're not reported. And I think it's very important that variations are reported in RARs and in Development Assessment Unit minutes. Next, thanks. Historically, variations from the Australian Standard have been very poorly managed. No explanation, no record, ineffective mitigation measures. And I'll just go through briefly some mitigation measures. The first one is signs. They're confusing. Pedestrians to give way. Goodness me. Indistinct writing on footpaths. Signs that mean nothing as you come up a ramp. Convex mirrors. The city loves convex mirrors. The first one on the right there, that convex mirror is on public property and it's been broken for 12 months. So I presume it's a City of Melville mirror. The one in the middle is so dirty you can't see me taking a photograph. And the one on the left, the mirrors are so high you can't see. The driver can't see them and the pedestrians can't see them. Now barriers, we have some barriers, concrete blocks, meant to keep people away from the exit so you can see sight lines. Now, flashing lights, well, they're poorly positioned, they're not visible to pedestrians, they're there for drivers and they don't mean anything. Now, in summary, what I'd like to see included is in the Local Planning Policy 1.6 is sight lines within the property, vehicle exits to be the same level as the verge, document control to show WAPC approval, reporting variations from 1.6 in RARs and Development Assessment Unit minutes, training of officers to correctly implement 1.6, both technically and culturally. And I think this is where the big failing has been. And update Local Planning Policy 3.1 so, with WAPC approval, because it's potentially an invalid local planning policy as it stands at the moment. Thank you. Any questions? Now, the last slide, if I go there. This is Macrae Road. This is how it finished. The one on the left, there's a person, and it's taken from the perspective of a vehicle driver. You can see there's a person there with their hand out, standing there. You can't see them, you can see the hand. They're within half a metre of stepping in front of a vehicle coming out. The one on the right is what it ended up with. All we got from the City of Melville was pushback. And this came about after the Building Commission got involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kenny. Are there any questions for Mr Kenny? Councillor Spanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Mr Kenny. Can you just explain or expand more on what you're wanting the officer to be trained on when you mention culturally? Thank you.
Mr Kenny?
There's been, from what I see, this is my observation, there's been a culture of we don't need to apply these rules. And I'll just take one building, which is the one at Forbes. It's a 13-storey building. Now, the first two JDAPs for that, it was rejected because of height. Now, I went to both of those meetings and it had a clause in the RAR that said the Australian standard applies. At the third meeting, it was approved. The clause that said the Australian standard applies was taken out and we replaced with a clause that said local planning policy 3.1 applies. Local planning, that's a mixed use. It's not a residential. Why was that done? Somebody's done that deliberately. Now what you've got a driveway that complies with the R codes, but then there's a door that's put on the side there that opens up into the sight lines and opens up into the path of vehicles. Somebody's moved that door and somebody's approved it. So culturally, there's issues there about actually implementing the policies and treating the policies like they're aspirational policies. They're not. They're a lot more than that.
Okay, thank you, Mr Kenny. I think you've made your point. Are there any further questions for Mr Kenny? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. I saw you put down 26 non-compliance apartments, which we are 26 non-compliant. So my question is, according to your research,
the 26.
Yes, in the beginning. Yeah. So, example, this Muriel Mills, the last picture, you said is compliance now. So, who decide is compliance now? Because I'm just wondering where your research come from, and are you backed by any sort of qualification to dispute all the things that are non-compliance? That's my question. Thank you.
Well,
Mr Kenny?
Firstly, I'm a mining engineer, a qualified engineer. I have a mine manager's ticket. As a mine manager, if you're a resident mine manager, you are responsible for the safety of all the equipment, all the people on that site. You are responsible to make sure everybody's trained, they know what their jobs are, they know what their risks are. So I have a very long history in safety assessment.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions? Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr Kenny, for the points you've raised, which I think are of some interest. In terms of the recommendation in front of us, what would you like to see the council do?
I think, well, there's a couple of things which are just tinkering with the first 2 points I think I made are really just tinkering. The sight lines within the property and the level that the exit goes out, that's tinkering. Documentation, I think, again, tinkering, that's just administrative type stuff. Reporting of variations within our code and within the RARs and the DAU minutes, because that's important, because things have happened, and you know, I've sat in RAR or JDAP meetings, and people have said to me, well, we've queried some of these things. People have said, okay, we've looked at that and we've assessed it, but where's the paperwork? There's no backup. There's never any backup. If you put it in there, and those traffic impact statements, they're just rubbish. Nobody looks at them. So if there's variations and you put them, you write them, you tell the people who sit on the JDAP panel that there are variations and this is what we've done about it. I think that's reasonably fair. And you need to know that.
Okay, thank you, Mr Kenny. Is there any other councillors who want to ask a question? Oh, Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr Kenny, for your presentation. So I guess just following on from Councillor Woodall, I've just I guess, got some concerns about us trying to amend the policies within this meeting to address your concerns. And so I guess the first question is just which policy it is that you think needs amending. Like I know the Mayor said at the start that you were doing your deputation on planning policy 1.6, but I think you also referred to 1.9 and 3.1. So were there...
3.1.
1.9 and 3.1. So are you recommending changes to both of those items?
No. I'm saying, well, basically I'm saying, I didn't go to 1.9. I said 1.6 and 3.1. 3.1 I think should come up next. I'm not saying do it at this meeting. I'm saying, you know, that's a policy for review and it should happen fairly quickly.
Yes, so if I can, Madam Mayor, continue. So the recommendation we have before us is to revoke LPP 1.9 and then amend LPP 3.1 and then I think to adopt some changes to
Councillor
LPP.
Ross, Mr Kenny speaking to you, P 2568, the local parking policy.
Yeah, so I guess that was part of my question because I think Mr Kenny referred to some other local planning policies as well. So I'm just trying to seek clarity.
I've referred to the two only.
Yeah, so those are across two different items on our agenda. So you're seeking changes to two?
Yeah. No, like 3.1, I'm saying, and I've separated that from the rest. I'm saying 3.1, don't forget it, and it's got to be done.
Okay, so you're okay with the officer's recommendation for that item? For 1.9/3.1?
Well, 3.1 is included in 1.6 as well as reference to it. It may actually be invalid.
Okay.
I didn't go there. No.
Thank
But
you.
it may be.
I don't really know what my further questions are, but I'm not sure how we're going to manage this tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Spanbrook? Yes, thank you.
Madam Mayor, do you want...
Thanks, Councillor Spanbrook. I was just going to say, would it be prudent to hear from the Acting Manager of Planning now to see...
We're going to, yeah. Okay. We're just finishing the questions first to Mr Kenny, then the officers will give us a short presentation and take questions. Councillor Spanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was actually just going to ask Mr Kenny that have you conferred with the officers at all with regard to your deputation? Have you had any conversation with what you're actually, the points you made in your slides?
To whom?
Have you had any discussions with the officers in respect to your deputation that you put to us now? And
not directly. Some time ago I did. This first came out in August last year. And
yes,
I put a deputation in.
It is familiar, yes, I have seen it.
Very shortly thereafter.
So you would have had some discussions with maybe the Director, Peter Morellis, perhaps?
Yes, and I think I can claim that I'm the reason it went to WAPC, because I talked to him about that. Because that was an oversight that had been ongoing. Yeah, and probably invalidates the local planning policy if that doesn't happen. Those sorts of things, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions from elected members? If there's no further questions, I will ask Ms Bainbridge from Planning to please give a response.
Thank you.
So Ms Bainbridge is Acting Director of Planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you so much for your deputation, Mr Kenny. Really appreciate the community input into reviewing this policy, and thank you for your deputation provided in advance so we had an opportunity to hopefully answer some of the concerns this evening. Sorry, next slide, please. Just to clarify, we're looking to adopt Local Planning Policy 1.6. We are coincidentally also reviewing LPP 3.1. LPP 3.1 does have a sightline provision, but that relates to single house development and under the R Codes provisions does not require West Australian Planning Commission approval in order for us to vary it via a local planning policy. So I just wanted to clarify that because I understand there was a bit of confusion. So just in relation to some of the concerns raised, yes, 100%. Previous assessments didn't appropriately take into consideration Australian standards, and yes, we understand there is a number of outstanding issues that we're still resolving, and they're separate compliance matters that are separate to this policy review. This policy review is to stop this from happening again, so that we make sure that we prioritise the safety of our community and the best sort of standard for our community to understand the city's position on interpretation of the Australian standards and implementation of the Australian standards. We've also bolstered our capacity to review the technical statements prepared by external traffic engineers to supplement our internal capacity, so that we always are making sure we're getting the best advice possible to make sure we're keeping community safety at the top of our priorities. So we're taking this very seriously, and we've implemented that in most recent RARs, where we have identified non-compliances and reported on them heavily. Two examples being 25 Almondbury, which resulted in a condition being applied to require the gradient is reviewed as part of amended plans as a result of the applicant not wanting to supply additional information prior. As well as number 6 Wilcox, which resulted in a risk assessment being provided to us in advance, as well as a peer review by external traffic consultant to ensure that it was an appropriate alternate measure to comply with the Australian standards. So we do take this very seriously, and we are so keen to improve in this space. Next slide, sorry. Just on the WPC approval, we proactively went to the West Australian Planning Commission prior to this evening and obtained approval for this policy and the provisions, just so that tonight, whatever you're considering has got the full support of the state government, so we know that we can implement it straight away. The state government would have preferred for us to have a resolution from council first, but we pushed hard to make sure that we got a resolution from the West Australian Planning Commission prior to this evening, so that we know that once this is adopted, we can implement it and know that we can do so confidently. Just as I mentioned before, LPP 3.1 only augments the sightline provisions for lower density development and under the current R codes. So it's section 3.2.3A, we're allowed to augment that without the approval of WPC. We've proposed to amend LPP 3.1 tonight and go out for advertising afterwards if it's adopted by council to clarify the requirement only applies to 3 or less dwellings, and also to further rationalise the provisions to create a safer sightline. So we're definitely taking sightline provisions very seriously, all the way down to lower density development as well. Next slide, please. So with sightlines within properties, the Australian standards does not require sightlines that are contained fully within the properties, and nor do the R codes. Containing with the property does make things easier for future development alike, but it's not always possible. It would require a larger setback, and that to the side boundary for the driveway, which potentially has a negative impact on the streetscape as well as the design, and they potentially result in the vehicle access dominating the streetscape. So it's not something that we can guarantee to be able to implement. This would also require that the policy is amended, re-advertised and resubmitted back to the WAC for their approval, and we cannot guarantee that this would be supported, noting that many arrangements throughout the city and the rest of WA do not have this arrangement due to the impact on the design and streetscape. Next slide, please. So gradients, we believe we've appropriately covered gradients being achieved on-site through the policy provisions and also requiring compliance with the Australian standards. We see this as the most appropriate method in case that the Australian standards are updated. We totally agree that level changes within the verge are not appropriate. They're a tripping hazard. And we believe that we've appropriately covered this process now. We had this request as part of initial design for 25 Almondbury, pushed back hard to make sure that its level changes are fully within the property and not within the verge. So we definitely hear that previous issue and are making amends to try and make sure that it does not happen again. Next slide, please. In terms of document control, really easy changes. We fully anticipate to add in the WAC approval date being the 26th of February this year, along with the document date when it's adopted by council at the end of the policy, just to make sure it's really clear that it does have the WPC approval for its implementation. And there's another comment made about potentially putting another provision in there to make it clear about the term variation, as it's used quite interchangeably in planning. It could mean several things, but I think Mr. Kenny's comment was in relation to the varying of R codes to use a performance criteria approach, so something called the design principles or element objectives, or augmenting, varying the deemed to comply and acceptable outcomes of the R codes, the standard compliance method, by using local planning policy provisions. So if the clarification is sought between these two processes, it is already covered by the introduction sections of the R codes, but it's no issue putting a little introductory statement within the R codes, within the policy to cover this and direct to the appropriate sections of the R codes. It's a very administrative change and very simply done. So next slide, please. Again, documentation with the RAR. I would point towards the two most recent ones where we had a sightline and gradient issues, where we feel that we appropriately reported within the report the variation in question and the issues and how we were able to resolve that through the technical advice or conditions. We would welcome review of these reports and how we can review our reporting practices in the future. Always keen to improve our transparency in that space, but those two reports were ones where we definitely took on board the feedback from previous applications and developments to make sure we were more transparent in our assessment of those matters. And I believe that is the main crux of the issues, so I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Bainbridge. Councillor Spanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks very much, Acting Director. I appreciate everything that you've just said. So in saying that, I'm quite confused, actually, a little bit concerned. When you saw what the deputation, Mr Kenny, highlighted issues on. So therefore, because it's all from last August, we're now May. So is there any way to move forward on this motion, actually considering moving a deferral motion, so we can actually get across these better and to see, exactly what Mr Kenny's got, because I'm not across everything that Mr Kenny mentioned. And also, as you said, I know you take it all seriously, but there appears to be a number of areas that you're still yet to work on. So can you just give me a bit of information, and I just appreciate a bit of guidance on that with regard to the deferral, whether it's you working with Mr Kenny or what the process. Thank you.
Ms Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in relation to some of Mr Kenny's comments, the sightlines within the property, if we were to look at further changes to the policy, that would require re-advertising and going through the West Australian Planning Commission, which I cannot guarantee would be supported, and hence you're risking the other provisions not being implemented or being as transparently implemented within that time frame that it would take. So if you are looking at taking on board that particular change, I would recommend that's through a separate review so that we can implement what we have already made changes to in the interim, whilst we pursue a further review to consider that, as well as the vehicle exits at the verge level. We believe that that's appropriately already covered within the policy, and we don't believe that we require further modification. In relation to the document control, very administrative changes that don't require further advertising and can potentially be covered through a minor change to the council resolution. Some of the training of the officers, again, that's something that I'm very keen to make sure that we're always at the top of our game and always engaging well with our technical services counterparts internally and engaging external consultants where possible. And ensuring that we have the appropriate document control at the end is all very easy to ensure changes. So as far as my professional recommendation is to adopt the policy with some minor modifications to the resolution to address Mr Kenny's comments in relation to sightlines within the property, if you wish us to investigate that in the future, as well as a minor administrative changes to ensure appropriate document control and information about the residential design codes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it was just really a question around how to deal with this item, given the suggestions of Mr. Kenny. So from what I understand then, what's being proposed is that the recommendation and the policy as it's written can be adopted with those minor changes incorporated, and then the issue around sight lines within the property can be, is that something officers would be willing to discuss with Mr. Kenny and try and see, I guess, review where we're at with that and what can be done, if anything?
Ms Bainbridge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in relation to the sightlines within the property, it will be difficult, and so we can definitely provide more information at the absolute minimum as to the difficulties of attempting to implement that and what that could contain. I think it would be appropriate for us to provide more information to council in relation to that provision. But if to hold up the entire policy review on that could be quite difficult and create a delay in the important provisions that we know are needed now. So, and we do have West Australian Planning Commission support for. So our recommendation is to separate that particular provision. There's also an option as well to defer this entire policy with recommendation to look at a couple of things and provide more information to council to a later council meeting date. And I believe an alternate recommendation has been prepared to that effect, if that's council's decision.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, two questions. First about changes to policy and then second about enforcement. Following on from a couple of things that other councillors have said in relation to the deputation we just had, am I able to confirm that by virtue of a couple of the changes, particularly Part 2, Sub 1 on vehicle access parking points, and also in particular Part 3 sight lines, which is I think 3.1 in the document, that where previously this document didn't refer to the relevant Australian standard, that is 2890, it now does clearly refer to it and makes, with the exception, I think, of the question of sightlines entirely within the property, this is now going to be a requirement of the policy as we've set it out.
Ms Bainbridge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the question. Yes, the requirement to comply with the Australian standards is much more robust now compared to the previous policy in the residential zone codes, which did have a number of gaps and was reliant on people just understanding and using the Australian standards as they stand alone. By incorporating into the policy, we're becoming leaders at creating more safe and transparent and, I guess, and easy for applicants to understand the city's position on sightlines and vehicle access and gradients. We're holding it to a much higher standard than any other local government, and as a result, the West Australian Planning Commission has recommended that our policy be circulated by WALGA to other local governments dealing with the same issues. So we are becoming leaders at ensuring that the Australian standards are better embedded into our planning framework.
Thank you. And just in relation to enforcement, I note the concerns raised by Mr. Kenny, particularly around documentation of variations and management of those. The policy as it's currently expressed notes that where variations are required, there is a performance-based assessment, that they must be supported by a risk assessment, and a qualified traffic engineer must demonstrate the proposal will not be unacceptable. And then 4.2, and I think this is really the crux of it, if the risk assessment and proposed mitigation measures are acceptable to the city and it's approved, the development shall be subject to a condition that requires the mitigation measures be implemented and maintained in perpetuity to the satisfaction of the city. That, I think, captures clearly the intention, but I guess in light of photos we've got of broken mirrors or mirrors that aren't clear or able to be viewed by the public, are you confident that you have the resourcing needed to ensure that where we say this must be maintained in perpetuity to the city, that we can actually follow through on that? And if not, what else do we need to do to ensure that you are appropriately resourced and trained to make sure that this isn't just something we put in our policy, but it's something we can action.
Ms Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Compliance is a really challenging space, and I think it's really important for us to consider the community expectations around how we undertake compliance. At the moment, we're resourced to be reactive, unfortunately. So when we receive complaint or we're notified of a particular issue, then we are able to react to it and provide the necessary support to correct it where we have the framework in place to do so. When there's a public safety issue and we become aware of it, that's also when we're resourced to be able to action it. But we're not driving the streets finding compliance matters to correct. We're busy enough with dealing with a number of complaints, as well as when we're around, we see a public safety matter, we will create a compliance matter. So that's what we're resourced to do, and I think that's what the community expects of us. If there's a public safety issue or a complaint, that we're able to respond to it. At the moment, it's a bit of a challenge because our existing framework isn't fantastic, and we also have a number of development approvals which don't have the best conditions. And so by having this policy in place, we hope to rectify that and create a better framework in which we can undertake compliance activity where needed more robustly and more effectively.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Councillor Spanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms Bainbridge, so what you suggested earlier about adding on a few points that will incorporate Mr Kenny's issues that he's raised, that would you be happy with we include those in your officer recommendation to make that amendment?
No.
Without actually
I think we'll get an answer from governance on that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, any amendments to the officer's recommendation would need to be done by council. Thank you.
I'll defer to Councillor Barber now because, in fact, I bypassed her by mistake.
Okay, right.
So if you would ask your question, can we follow up on yours after, please?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move a deferral motion then, please. Sorry?
We don't have a motion on the table yet.
Oh.
Councillor Barber?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Yes, I've heard what you've said, and thank you, Acting Director of Planning. And I hear what you're saying, it's important to get these policies out and running, but one area that does concern me are the sightlines within the properties, and I think that probably does need further investigation. And I believe you said something to the effect that it's about streetscape, and yet the last slide that Mr Kenny showed us with a big fence and no fence, I thought that made the streetscape look a lot nicer. So with streetscape looking nicer without the large barriers and with the safety as our prime concern, I don't understand why sightlines within properties wouldn't get through the WAPC.
Ms Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you so much for the question. It's not about the structure necessarily next to the sightline, it's about the setback that would be required to be facilitated to contain the sightline wholly within the lot. So I believe the Australian standards, off the top of my head, is a 2 metre setback from the side boundary. So if you've got a 6 metre wide vehicle access point to allow two-way access for some of these larger developments, you're looking at 8 metres of your frontage taken up by side setback, as well as a 6 metre vehicle access point. And that will be pushed up against by the development community quite substantially, and it's not something that's you find in a lot of context around WA and Perth. The Australian standards doesn't require that the sightline's wholly contained within the lot, nor do the residential sign codes. So we'd have to make a really robust case to the West Australian Planning Commission and go through a full advertising process if we were to be successful in implementing that provision within our policy.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Ms Bainbridge, if you could maybe just help me understand, trying to get my head around the sightlines and contain within the lot. So, my understanding is Mr Kenny is suggesting that the sightlines are contained within the lot, and I'm assuming that is because once they go outside of the lot, you can't control what the neighbours do. So if the sightlines extend to the neighbour's property, they could have a shrub or a retaining wall or something in the way. So those sightlines, it can't be controlled, so they're not necessarily maintained in perpetuity. Is that right? Is that what the discussion is about?
Ms Bainbridge?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Once a crossover and a driveway is approved in a certain location, if a neighbour was to come along and propose development within the sightline, that would likely trigger a discretion being exercised, a variation, which would require a sightline assessment to be undertaken. So it does impact the neighbouring property. And so when we do see these developments, and they're proposing a lesser setback to the side boundary, we require, that to be taken into consideration as part of their assessment. So it's, and often some people don't have fences and shrubs and whatnot in that location, or they're very low-level shrubs. So it is something that is common across all of Western Australia. Everyone has, their vehicle access points, 0.5, 1 metre away from the side boundary to provide a sufficient enough of a sightline, but still ensure that you're not dominating the frontage with driveway. So it's not something that any other local government has a requirement within their policy, as far as we're aware, to contain the sightline wholly within the lot. As I said before, it's not within the R codes and it's not within the Australian standards.
Thank you, Ms Bainbridge. Councillor Wheatland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for your information and your presentation. Look, again, following on from the previous two questions, you just said then that if there was a deficient, or if there was a concern raised, that there would be, that 1 metre would be a sufficient enough of a sight line to be contained in that property. Something about the variation, etc., etc. My question is, sorry for not being very clear, is in a commercial sense, is that the same set of standards? Because you would think that, if it's supposed to be a 2 metre setback from the boundary for a 6 metre driveway, making that 1 metre, wouldn't that impose a risk and danger? Please.
Ms Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question. So it is covered by our current policy, which has sightlines and visual truncation requirements for existing vehicles to be designed in accordance with clause, I think it's got the specific reference of the Australian standards in here. So clause 3.2.4 and figure 3.3 of the Australian standards. So making very clear that that sightline requirement applies to commercial properties as well. So it's the section 1 of the policy, so it's part 2 of the policy covers non-residential development. So there's a very clear, sightline provision in there that covers this. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Ettinger.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your presentation and for your candour. It's really good to hear that you've been making progress in planning and trying to right the wrongs of the past. So what we want is, we don't want ramps that come up to the, I just want to clarify, we don't want ramps that come up to the edge of the property. We want a ramp that comes up and then a flat bit where the car can stop inside the property so that they can have a look to see if there's people walking past. And as a approval organisation, can we ask developers that that's how they design their exits, rather than having the ramp coming up to the edge of the property? Thank you.
Ms Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in relation to gradients and vehicle access points, I think it's really important for us to distinguish between the verge and inside the property. So inside the verge area, we have control. That's our land, and they have to get a crossover approval. And my team's been working really closely with Kim Brotzel's mixed team to make sure that we've got a hard line on minimising any modifications within the verge, because they are trip hazards, and it is somewhat of a privatisation of the verge area. That's for everyone. Verges are for all users. So whereas the changes within the property boundary have to comply with the Australian standards. So I believe if you're looking at a certain scale of development, there's a requirement for a flat section for a certain distance. I believe it's 6 metres off the top of my head, before it has to dip, before we can start implementing the dip down. If you're looking at doing alternate approach, it requires a risk assessment, and it's very clear what has to be contained within there, and we have to be satisfied that it's as the safest solution. So it was now really clear within our policy the additional information that's required when people are proposing that, but the stock standard approach is to require that flat section as in a minimum. So as exampled by the 25 Almondbury Street development approval, we put a condition on to that effect to require that the gradient was as per Australian standards, which required that flatter section, and hence a lifting of the levels within the development.
Yes, carry on.
So do we have the expertise internally to review and ensure that the plans comply? And if we don't, is that when we go to consultants? Thank you.
Bainbridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we do have expertise internally. However, capacity can sometimes be a bit of an issue, and unfortunately, due to the timeframes for DAPs and larger development applications, that's when we usually, or when we have where it's a bit tricky and we're not 100% sure, or there's a bit of disagreement potentially between the external consultant that the applicants used and our internal, we might seek a third opinion from another traffic engineer. So we want to be absolutely sure. So we've increased our capacity by using external consultants, but we do have in-house capability, I should say, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? All right, thank you, Ms Bainbridge, for those extensive answers to questions. We're now moving on to the item itself. We have the officer recommendation. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded. Councillor Edinger.
Could I please move an amendment, Madam Mayor?
Yes, what is your amendment?
So I would like to add a new point 3, request the CEO to further review the issue of sightlines within property boundaries and additional training for city officers.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Barber, thank you.
And I'd also just seek governance advice. There were some minor changes that Ms Bainbridge indicated could be made by officers relating to a couple of the points that Mr Kenny raised around document control and the like. I'm just wondering if that needs to be included in an amendment, or can that just be done administratively, given that the attachment is referenced in the officer recommendation?
Ms Newman, Head of Governance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. I think if we just added to that to the amendment that administrative changes be made as discussed, I think that would cover that.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
if I could add that as well to the amendment.
Thank you. Does your seconder agree? Councillor Barber? Yes, thank you.
Can I just speak to that briefly? Sorry. Thank
Oh,
you.
wait, just a moment. The amendment, we have to get the mover to do that. So the mover of the amendment needs to speak to it first. So, Councillor Woodall?
I'm happy to hear Councillor Edinger's point if it might influence the wording.
It's just an administrative thing.
Oh,
On
okay,
page
thank you.
8 of 23, which is clause 5.3.5, there's a sentence that doesn't end. It needs another word. The first sentence, when where ramp gradients are not provided in accordance with AS 2980.1, a risk assessment report with proposed mitigation measures should be prepared. I don't know, full stop, and then go on to say the report must be prepared.
That can be corrected administratively. Okay. All right, thank you. Councillor Woodall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of the amendment, firstly, is just to allow the city officers to make those administrative changes that were raised by Mr Kenny and that I think there's broad agreement on. And secondly, just around the issue of sightlines within the boundaries of the property and also the additional training for city officers. I think those are important issues to investigate and do further work on, but I agree that it is not appropriate, I don't think, to hold up endorsement and implementation of the policy, given that we know it has WAPC approval already. It would be good to have the policy in place so that we can start enforcing some of the provisions around the sightlines that currently are in there. And hopefully that we can do further work on the issue of sightlines within the boundaries and see if there is the potential to advance that further with the WAPC. Thanks.
Councillor Barber, do you wish to speak now or later?
Oh, just quickly, if that's all right, Madam Mayor. Yes, I think this is a good amendment. We do need to get these updated policies implemented and enforced. However, Mr Kenny, and I thank him for all his hard work, said that it just needs a tweak, and I think this amendment is a way of tweaking the policy, and I think hopefully he's happy with it, and I think we'll be happy with further investigation on internal sightlines. Thank you.
Speaker against?
Madam Mayor, can I make an
Councillor
amendment to
Span.
the amendment, please?
You may, pardon?
An amendment to the amendment?
We have to deal with the amendment first and then you can
Okay.
amend it if it's been passed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so is there a speaker against? Any voice, anyone opposed?
Yep.
Oh, Councillor Green?
Not so much a speaker against, just a question perhaps for the mover of the amendment, just on wording, whether we could just include the word perhaps property boundaries, sightlines within property boundaries, just to be a little bit more specific about whether we're talking about verge or private land.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Happy with that? Councillor Barber? Yes? Yes, it's been adopted. It's in that amendment. Councillor Spanbrook?
Madam Mayor, I will speak against this, only because I don't think it goes far enough. I think when you have a resident that raises issues, as Mr Kenny has done, and we know that he is a learned man and he's quite experienced and he's been across this for a number of years, I think that we do need to take a bit more on board, and I'm not really sure how to present the information that I'm not saying we have to, I'm going to move a deferral motion, but to include that, can there be some conference with Mr Kenny? I'm not sure, I know we need to go to the next one. Councillor Wardle may agree to it, so we can just do one amendment, include in his amendment alone. And that way then, I just think it's very important to listen and to take the information on board, not on board, but to confer with the officers and Mr Kenny once we adopt this, if that can be included in there somehow. Thank you.
Ms Bowman, CEO, will respond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Spanbrook. I believe the wording in the amendment would cover us actually doing that as part of the process, because we're reviewing it. We would be consulting with Mr Kenny in relation to that and other stakeholders. So thanks. Yep.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm very happy with that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Spanbrook. So is there anyone opposed to this amendment? If there's no one opposed, the amendment is carried. Now we're moving to the substantive motion as amended. Is there anyone opposed? If there is no one opposed, I declare it carried. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to the next item. C25-268, Statement of Financial Activity for March. I need a mover and seconder, please. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Fitzgerald moved, seconded. Councillor Edinger, any voice, anyone opposed? I declare that carried. Item C25-271, Rating Strategy. Now, prior to consideration of officer recommendation, I note that Councillor Robbins has submitted an alternative motion with notice which is to be considered first. Additionally, I remind Council that an officer advice note was distributed to elected members in relation to the alternative motion on Friday and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Councillor Robbins, do you wish to proceed with your alternative motion?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So you're moving it. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Woodall. Thank you. Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Fellow elected members, I respectfully request your support for this alternative motion, which suggests we advertise a rate increase of 3.5% on last year, as opposed to the 4.5% suggested by officers. My reasons for recommending this change are as follows. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis where many residents are struggling to keep up with household costs. It is appropriate that we provide support to residents by keeping the overall rates increase to a minimum if it is reasonable and feasible for us to do so. I believe it is both reasonable and feasible. Some councillors may agree with staff that a 4.5% increase on last year's rates is required for us to continue to provide the same level of service to our residents. The budget that has been drafted consists of an operating program and capital works projects. If we are to reduce the budget, we must either make cuts to our operating program or identify capital projects to be removed or deferred. I believe there are opportunities to do both of these things. The argument is often made that there is a cumulative impact of reducing the percentage by which we will increase rates. I understand this argument and comprehend the calculations which show a long-term financial impact on our bottom line of several millions of dollars. However, the issue I have with this argument is that it is based on the assumption that we continue to provide the same level of service into the future that we provide now. The City of Melville provides a high level of service to our residents, evidenced by beautiful parks and foreshore areas, well-maintained sporting facilities and well-resourced libraries, just to name a few. However, in my view, there are several areas in which we over-deliver. We have come a long way from the days when local governments were responsible for the 3 Rs, rates, roads and rubbish, and nothing more. These days, there's a lot more that local governments must deliver and more again that we may deliver. I like to remember the 3 Rs when I ponder the role of local government because it's a humble reminder that many residents expect us to deliver necessary services and not a whole lot more. Local government does more than it has ever done before, and in my view, we've gone too far. When we think about what local government should be providing, we should consider how beneficial the provision will be to the entire district and all of its people. This doesn't mean that every service we offer needs to benefit all people, but we shouldn't be providing services that only benefit a small number. In addition, it isn't our role to provide services that duplicate those offered by our state or federal governments. If we were to look at reducing what we do by looking through these 2 lenses, what is only accessed by a small number of people and what is being offered elsewhere, I believe we could find many opportunities to save on costs. We have already commenced work on reviewing our service plans, and this work must continue. As an elected member group, we must diligently assess what we offer and make some tough decisions about what we continue to provide moving forward. I accept the decisions about rationalising operations cannot be made overnight. My recommendation is that we commit to doing this work and in the short term find savings in our capital works budget. At elected member engagement sessions, we have discussed several projects such as a new footpath on Dunvegan Road in Applecross or traffic calming measures on Beasley Road in Leeming that could be removed from the 25-26 budget in order for these savings to be realised. I am open to councillors suggesting such projects to be included in the wording of this motion tonight. I'm also happy if it is the preference of the group to allow staff to take the lead and find savings where they think it's most appropriate. In closing, I believe that there are many opportunities for savings to be found in the draft 25-26 budget, and by supporting a 3.5% rates increase as opposed to a 4.5% increase, we can ensure these savings are passed on to our residents and ratepayers. I urge you to support the alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robbins. Councillor Woodall, do you wish to speak now or later?
Later, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I thank Councillor Robbins for bringing this alternative motion. And in many respects, I agree with the part of the sentiment that councillors raised. I think the most useful part of the motion that councillor has identified is that the process of reviewing our services ought to be an ongoing one, and it ought to be one that we commit to in light of a view to rationalising our services, and rationalising will mean reducing some services, it may mean expanding others. Insofar as the motion calls for a commitment to undertake that work early and prior to the next budget, I agree entirely. I think there is work to be done, and part of that work will involve asking difficult questions about what services we provide and whether they are appropriate for providing. I think, however, it is worth putting into context why we are considering reducing from 4.5 to 3.5 sort of immediately in the short term, which will require going off and identifying either cuts to current services or the cutback of capital works projects in the immediate term, rather than with a view to rationalising the budget over a slightly longer period. Yes, I accept, and of course I think everyone here would accept, that there is a challenge to all residents and ratepayers in the City of Melville, that is the cost of living crisis. However, in real dollar terms, the difference between a 4.5% rate increase and a 3.5% rate increase for those who are going to be doing it toughest, that is those who are on the minimum proposed rate, is $14.35. Now, I think that over an annual period, $14.35 is not an amount that will be a very significant impost on someone's experience of their cost of living. However, a reduction of the amount proposed across the entire budget could mean some very significant reductions to the services that are offered by the city. And my concern is that when we talk cost of living, it is absolutely appropriate that we identify the dollar cost of what we are asking residents to contribute, but it's also important that we recognise that our provision of services directly impacts the cost of living of our residents. That is, when we stop providing services, residents who rely on those services will need to find them elsewhere and will often need to fund them themselves. That is, it is not simply the case that every cut to our budget is a positive impact on cost of living for our residents. Sometimes quite the opposite. Cuts to our budget mean that those services that are necessary will need to be funded out of residents' pockets themselves. I think that while there is certainly merit, and I support an overall project very early out from the next budget of reviewing the services, I don't think that that is that a reduction from 4.5% to 3.5% in the current context will necessarily have the cost of living benefits that Councillor Robbins is trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. A speaker for. Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I thank Councillor Robbins and Councillor Fitzgerald for the points they've made. I look at this as what the choice that we have between 4.5% and 3.5% in pure dollar terms, as Councillor Fitzgerald has noted, is not a huge amount over the course of 12 months. But I think we also need to take into account that there's a cumulative effect on people, not just from their rates, but from their electricity bills, from their water bills, all the other costs and services that they pay for. And even though it may only be $14 in the case of the City of Melville, their electricity bills and water bills go up by similar amounts or perhaps more. These costs quickly add up to a significant amount of money, which has an impact. I understand that there's concern or there's fear around that if we don't have the 4.5% increase, that in the long run there may be impacts on the council's financial health or the council's financial sustainability. And I just want to deal with that point because I think it's one that's worth critiquing. So if we're talking about not spending money on renewal of assets, so not repairing assets, not maintaining them, and we defer that expenditure, then yes, necessarily that's going to have an impact on our financial sustainability into the long term. Similarly, if we start to fund operating expenditure, so services, out of reserves, clearly that's going to be unsustainable as well. I think in the case of this 3.5% proposed increase, it's been identified that there are new capital works, so new capital projects in the form of the footpath on Dunvegan Road and the speed bumps on Beasley Road, for example, that could not proceed, and that would easily allow for a 3.5% increase. And not proceeding with those projects actually won't have any negative impact on the financial sustainability of the City of Melville. In fact, if we don't proceed with those projects, we're not going to increase the asset base of the city by as much. So in some ways, it will actually be more financially sustainable because we're not adding new assets. So in my view, it's responsible. A 3.5% increase is responsible, provided that we identify new capital works or services that we no longer want to continue with. Given the difficulties around suddenly turning off a service and the impacts that can cause, as Councillor Fitzgerald has quite rightly noted, I think the only feasible option is to not proceed with capital works, new capital works. And I think the two that have been identified, by some councillors around this table, would be appropriate to keep the rate increase to 3.5%, noting that the long-term financial plan, even though it looks at a higher increase this year, does in the outer years going forward have only 3% forecast, a 3% rate increase. But if you have 3.5% in every year, the long-term effect of that in terms of the city's financial sustainability, I believe will be relatively minimal and is sustainable. So on that basis, I would urge you to support the alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to speak against the motion. So I would like to just talk about the context, and the report is for the purposes. What we're agreeing on is going out to advertising at 4.5%. The alternative motion is suggesting 3.5%. So it's important, I think, that we look at issues of our dependence on residential rates, the legacy of ageing infrastructure, our responsibility as elected members to ensure our finances are sustainable. Now, our dependence on residential rates means that we're looking towards our residents. 80% of our revenue or our income from rates comes from our residents. We have a high dependency on our residential rates, and we have 20% coming from commercial. This is a problem, and if we really want to make proper significant changes to our dependence on residential rates, we need to increase our commercial sector and our ability to get alternative revenue apart from rates. We need to move from 80% reliance on residential rates to 70% in the first instance, and increase commercial and other income to 30%. And that would be a really good start that we could progress with in this coming year. Now, the legacy of ageing infrastructure. We've inherited ageing infrastructure from facilities and from previous council's decision where maintenance and renewal did not occur. However, this council has expressed concern over its ageing infrastructure because there has been increased demand for upgraded facilities, and especially in the area of women's sports. In the past, sporting facilities catered predominantly for men, and women were left to change in car parks and in the dark. We decided our women deserved better than that and planned to upgrade sporting facilities in a short time frame instead of 20 years, as planned. So, of course, this is one item that puts stress on our budget and reserves, but it needs to be done. Also, there are other important expenditures such as upgrading our IT, upgrading of our Customer First program, providing sufficient public open space, to name a few, and other issues of inflation and rising costs of much needed facilities. So the officers have considered all these issues and costed them into our latest budget. Now, responsibility of elected members to ensure finances are sustainable. I did request information from the Director of Corporate Services, Gary Tuffin, to give a breakdown of our expenditure of reserves over the past couple of years, which I have circulated. So we have spent 90 million of reserves in 2 years. Now, of course, we have put some of that money back into the reserves. So it's something like 50 million over the last couple of years, which is a lot. The Council has been making expensive decisions which have impacted on those reserves. However, officers have assured us that we're not going to be quite so reliant on reserves in this following year if we have a good rate increase for 4.5%. So I think that it's important to also look at the Local Government Act, where the Council must make its decisions on the basis of evidence, on merits and in accordance with the law, taking into account the local government's finances and resources. So if we are going to have a look at, if we're going to consider that we're doing state and federal government responsibilities, I think that we could probably knock a huge amount of things out of our budget, not just one or two things, quite significant amounts of things out of our budget. But unfortunately, we have had these quite a number of things given to us to do by the state and federal government, and they provide a certain amount of funding, and we all know that's not adequate. So we need to deal with that. But I think that with this in mind, the officer's recommendation suggests we advertise at 4.5% rate increase and make our final decision at the June budget. So it's a very modest rate, and officers have spent many hours presenting to Council a well-reasoned, balanced budget. Now, the alternative motion, in my opinion, ignores the officer's balanced budget by dropping the advertised rate from 4.5 to 3.5%. The officers have warned us that such a low rate will cause council finances to become unsustainable going forward. And I suspect that this cut will be causing more decline in our reserves. In the debate tonight, I've not heard or read any evidence or merit in the movers' reasons for such a large drop in rates income, and we must make decisions on the basis of evidence and on merits, according to the Local Government Act, and considering the local government's finance and resources. So I think it's very important to consider that we're only looking at a $14.35 increase, but it will make a very big difference to our financial sustainability as a council, and we have a responsibility to ensure that our council can continue to provide the services to our community. So I urge you not to vote for this. I note that Councillor Lim has joined us online. Okay, we have actually had a balanced debate now. We've had 2 against, unless there's more speakers that would like to speak. Pardon? Okay, so we have, do we have any speakers for? So we're going to end up with a very unbalanced debate. That's all I'm going to say. So we've had speaker for, 2 speakers against. Now we've got another speaker for. So we have that balanced debate. So I'll have to defer back to Councillor Robbins. Pardon? Sorry. So, pardon? At the moment, we have a balanced debate. If we have more speakers for and against, I'm happy to take them. But if we only have speakers on one side and not on the other, then I will have to wrap the debate up, just to be fair. Okay? So what am I hearing? I've got a speaker, Councillor Robbins is going to wrap up, so she's a speaker for. Councillor Spanbrook, what are you going to speak?
I will speak against it.
You'll speak against?
Yeah.
And, oh, hang on.
Oh,
Both want to speak against. Okay, well, we've got 2 speakers against. Do we have any other speakers for? Okay, well, we'll need to wrap up the debate then. Okay, Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just briefly respond to some of the comments that have been made. I agree, Madam Mayor, with a lot of what you said. I agree that we need to try to increase the proportion of rates income that comes from our commercial properties, and I also agree that we need to look at diversifying our income streams where we can, and I think that those are both very worthy projects that we should continue to pursue. In terms of the comment that we should go with the 4.5 and make our final decision in June, I guess my view is that it's best now for the council to outline its intention. So if it ends up that we go with the 4.5 because that's what council want to do, then I think that's great. But I would just hate for us to, I guess, indicate that we want to go one way now and then change it later. So I think that rather than just adopt the high rate increase and have the officers prepare a budget with essentially more money to play with, I'd prefer to pull it back and then make a decision consistent with that at our June meeting. Just to respond to the comments about the council finances being unsustainable going forward if we make this decision, I think that argument only stands up if we are making changes or if we're deferring items from the capital budget. If we entirely remove items from the capital budget, like Councillor Woodall said, if we decide that we don't want a footpath on Dunvegan Road and we don't need traffic calming measures on Beasley Road, then it doesn't actually affect the longevity of our financial position. So it doesn't affect our financial sustainability going forward. It would only be if we are deferring projects and putting them off that becomes a reality. And just in terms of an earlier comment about cutting services and the claim that if we're to cut services, then it means that residents will need to find money to pay for those facilities themselves. I think that there are definitely situations where that may be the case, but I think a majority of the time that wouldn't be the case. So, for example, a new footpath, someone's not going to go and build their own footpath, traffic calming measures, various concerts, or maybe author talks that are happening in the library. People aren't going to, I think, go out and seek those things if they're not offered. People just won't make use of those services. So, yeah, just to respond to some of those comments, I think that the 3.5% increase is the way to go. I think 4.5 is really stretching our residents financially more than we need to, and I think the responsible thing to do is to increase by just 3.5. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins. We'll now proceed to the vote. So Green is supporting Councillor Robbins' 3.5% advertising, and Red is for not supporting. Councillor Lim, could you please give us your vote?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support this amendment motion. Thank you.
I can't really see that. Did I vote? Oh. Councillor Edinger? That is lost 4-8. Thank you very much. We now return to the officer's recommendation. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Spanbrook. All right, thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald, do you wish to introduce this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I think in light of the discussion that's already been had, we've probably covered much of the questions of rates and rates increase. I think the only thing I would add is that I commend the amount of work that the officers have put into this budget, which is to be advertised. I certainly have noticed a very significant difference in the extent to which the documentation around the budget has been explained to elected members, that it has been accessible to elected members early on in the process. And I think that is a significant and important change. I also wish to acknowledge that a considerable amount of work has been done in attempting budget rationalisation even before the point that it comes to us for discussion. So I know that many departments have had situation where they've been gone back to and said, well, in fact, we would like you to identify further cuts to your budget or further potential savings even before it's gotten to us. So the 4.5% represents, in my view, a fairly realistic assessment of the cost to continue the status quo. I don't think in the current economic climate, particularly with the incredible pressures on construction, anyone would be surprised to learn that it is much more expensive to provide some of the services and facilities that we are spending. And I think it is worth noting the amount of work that has been done to restrict the budget ask to what it has, the 4.5%. Finally, while there is, I think, room for agreement and disagreement about what should be on our services list, I note that the services have been better documented than ever before, and that there is a commitment from Council to reviewing our service offerings early and before the next budget. So in terms of overall assessment of our financial health and our overall financial strategy, we are not only in a good place, but we have a council with its hands on the reins and that is actively taking control of that consideration. So I think the members of the public should be aware that this is something that we're working on quite closely. Otherwise, I think this is an entirely justifiable ask, and I'm very confident that when we go out to advertising, it will be, if not entirely positive, because no rates ask is ever entirely positive, I think on balance we might be surprised. Thank you.
Councillor Spanbrook, do you wish to speak now or later?
I will just make a few points, and I do concur with Councillor Fitzgerald, and I would also like to commend the CEO and Director Tuffin, because the budget they have presented to us, it's transparent, and I have found it so easy to work through and work with them. And even though this 4.5%, it's just like to note that it's only the advertised rate. We're not fixated on 4.5%, as a rate increase, but it's being advertised, and so there can be some movement allowable to elected members from that. So I'll leave it there and just thank the officers for their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any voice against? Anyone who wishes to speak against? Councillor Robbins.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure that I need to speak against because I think it's all been said, but if I can just echo the comments, thanking the CEO and other staff for their efforts in preparing all the information to allow us to make informed decisions. The elected member engagement sessions have been really good in terms of being able to grasp all the information and make informed decisions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will, Councillor Wheatland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Speaker 4. Just briefly, look, this 4% rate increase is not about just splashing cash around. It's about keeping the city financially stable and future ready. We saw at the recent election that the younger generation are the dominant voice in the community now, and we need to ensure the stability and the future of future residents and ratepayers by being responsible with our finances and our reserves. where am I now? Okay, so we've had 2 years of 0% increases during COVID, and the last couple of years we've had lower rate increases. And if we keep doing this, we're going to set ourselves up for bigger rate hikes later, or worse, cutbacks to services and community projects. This is in line with our long-term financial plan. It's actually under the rate we set last year. I think it was 4.87, was it, last year's rates? Someone? 4.5, okay.
4.5.
It's in line, and we endorsed the long-term financial plan last year after a lot of work by the city and the city's officers and councillors and elected members. And the long-term financial plans helps us fund local services that ease cost of living pressures, like libraries, recreation and community programs. It helps us avoid debt. It'll help us deliver steady, predictable outcomes for current and future ratepayers. And it's around $1.86 a week for the average household. I don't know how that factors into Councillor Fitzgerald's $14, but it's pretty close, I think. And it means we can keep building a city that works for everyone, and we don't leave anyone or the majority. It's not just for now, but it's for the next generation too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think have we got any speakers against? Because we've heard quite a bit for. And just to remind you, it is a 4.5% rate. You said 4%, so you missed the 0.5, but that's okay. No, that's okay, no problem, as long as you know what you're voting on. Okay, so if there's no further voices against, I'm going to ask Councillor Fitzgerald to wrap up the debate.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think there's been very broad agreement about the extent to which we have been impressed by the presentation of the budget. I think that this is a reasonable budget, and I've no more to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the vote. Councillor Lim, could you please tell us your vote?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I vote against. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So Green is for the 4.5% advertisement of rates, and Red is against. Yep, I have. Thank you. Carried 8-4. And moving on now to item C25, 279, Policy and Legislation Committee nomination request. Can I please have a mover and seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Edinger, seconded Councillor Barber. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. Councillor Edinger, can you please open the debate?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The introduction of the new committee structure means that we now have 3 committees, and so we're still in a bit of flux, I think, settling down, working out where we're going. And I think that it is terrific that Councillor Spanbrook is wanting to be a permanent member of the Policy and Legislation Committee. I think it builds a bit of robustness into the committee. It gives them another point of view that they can have contributing to conversations about policy or legislation that they will be considering. And for these reasons, I'm supporting the motion, and I ask the rest of you to follow my lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barber, do you wish to speak now?
I'll just reserve my right. Is that okay? Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Robbins, did you wish to speak against?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. When we established the new committee and looked at the terms of reference for our other committees, I think the way that we appointed councillors to each committee was good. So we now have a situation where each councillor sits on one committee, and the mayor is obviously on all 3. And I think that that's quite nice in terms of making sure that we have enough people on each committee, but also making sure that each councillor is is committed to serving on at least one committee. My recommendation would be that we wait until the October elections, because usually after the elections we would take a new look at all of our committees, our 3 internal committees and our external committees, and I guess look for all the positions would be vacated, and we would seek appointments and look at nominating everyone. Or people would look at re-nominating for any committees they wish to be on. I know that there's no hard and fast rules around how many people are on each committee. I know there might be some changes to the terms of reference required to facilitate this change. But yes, there are no hard and fast rules about how many people we have on each committee. So I know that this change is possible, but it would be my preference to look at it holistically after the local government elections, where other councillors may also wish to nominate themselves for more than one committee, and we can look at the structure, the terms of reference, the number of elected members on each committee, whether it's working or not, and whether we need to change the quorum and any other changes that might be required. So my preference would be to look at it holistically after the local government elections. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there, the challenge is there another speaker against? Okay, well then what I'll do is, yes, I'll take Councillor Barber.
Okay, thanks, Madam Mayor. This is a brand new committee, the Policy and Legislation Committee, and I think that having that extra point of view, as Councillor Edinger said, offering some diversity will only aid in this committee. They are a decision-making committee. I know we say our little committees aren't decision-making, but we do make decisions that we then take to council, so we decide whether things go to council. So I think it is important that we get people on the committees that are there and they're keen. We've got one councillor per committee as per the new committee structure, but this has created fairly small committees. And as the P&L committee is a new committee, I think the more the merrier. In fact, 7 is probably the max, I agree with that, but 7 is sort of a magic number for many boards and committees. So I can't see a problem with raising our committee number to 7. If people want to attend, I think that's fantastic. And so I commend Councillor Spanbrook for wanting to go on an extra committee and offer her knowledge and wisdom. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea, especially as it's a new committee and there'll be so much to discuss.
Okay. Okay, is there a speaker against? Councillor Woodall.
Thank you.
Just remind you that if we have a committee of 6, the chair does not have a tie-breaking vote. Hopefully it doesn't get to that situation. Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky because I have no actual particular issue with Councillor Spanbrook joining the committee. However, I just want to, and so I reserve the right to vote for the motion, but I just want to speak against, just in the sense that I would like to see, as I think Councillor Barber has touched on, some guidelines for each of the committees around a maximum membership, just so that we don't continue adding one person here, one person there, because there may be votes that are close, or someone has a particular issue they want to be on the committee for. So I just think if the committees get to the point where they're the whole of council, there's not much point having the committee. So I think having a maximum number for each of the committees, which is consistent, and also just working out what the quorum would be in that situation. I assume it's half the committee, and that number will fluctuate, but I think just clarifying some of those things would be good, just so that we have a clear kind of direction as to how such requests will be dealt with going forward, would be helpful. But in terms of Councillor Spanbrook's specific request, I have no issue with her being on the committee. Thank you.
Okay. Right, I think we've sort of exhausted the speakers. I shall ask Councillor Edinger to wrap up, please.
I think it's great, as I said before, that Councillor Spanbrook is stepping up to join this committee. I'm sure she'll be a brilliant member and do lots of wonderful contributing. So I ask you all to vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the vote. So Green is supporting the addition of Councillor Spanbrook on the committee and Red is against. Oh, Councillor Lim, can you please give us your vote?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll make my leave after this vote, but I'm voting for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lim. Okay, that's counted 10, that is 110 to, it's carried 10-2 and achieved the absolute majority. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Councillor Spanbrook. You are now a committee member. All right, moving.
Congratulations. I'll see you. Good night. See you later.
Thank you, Councillor Lim. Councillor Lim is leaving the meeting. E2567, request for removal of street tree, 21 Ferguson Street, Alfred Cove. Now, prior to tabling the officer recommendation, I'd like to advise the council that an alternative motion was received from Councillor Barber. However, this has been received without notice and will be considered after the officer recommendation. So has everybody received a copy of Councillor Barber's alternative motion? So you have read it. I just want to be sure you've all read it, you know. Councillor Whitland, yeah?
Can I just get a bit of clarity about that? Is that about removing the other tree?
One tree only. There's no other trees in question. There's one tree only that's been considered.
Okay. But
That's the one blocking the driveway.
Talked about two.
No, I think there was a bit of confusion.
I just wondered if
It's only one.
If Glenn's motion was referring to the other tree.
No. Okay. No. The tree that is in question, the one that's blocking the driveway,
Yeah.
that's the one.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation? It can lapse, you know. Councillor Fitzgerald, do you wish to move that? All right, thank you. And Councillor Wheatland seconding. Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald, can you please open the debate? Oh, is there any voice? Is anyone opposed? Yes. So Councillor Fitzgerald, can you please open the debate?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And it seems that once again I am speaking in favour of the protection of the much maligned Queensland box tree. The Queensland box tree has a very unfortunate name, and I think that is not necessarily a slight on our cousins, the banana benders. And in fact, it's probably better than some of the other colloquial names that the Lophostomon confertus has gotten. It's often referred to in the eastern states as the box scrub, the pink box, or the vinegar tree, all of which are singularly unattractive. Nevertheless, I think it's worth reflecting on why this tree is frequently chosen as a street tree, or at least was in years past. And that is because it is a very hardy tree. It tolerates droughts, it tolerates poor soil, it tolerates smog and pollution far better than most natives. Importantly, it provides more shade than a eucalyptus, and it rarely sheds limbs. So councillors will know that we're frequently asked to intervene, particularly around lemon-scented gums, because of risks in relation to limbs being dropped. That is why the Queensland box tree was preferred for so long. And I think we can look at it and people can disagree about whether they think it's an attractive tree or not, but the argument that merely because it is not native, it is from Queensland, that is a reason to object to the tree is, I think, unfair to Queenslanders. Many Queenslanders have come to Western Australia and made a great contribution to this state, and so that I won't be accused of being partisan, I'll identify former Premier Mark McGowan and also Gina Reinhardt as Queenslanders who have made excellent contributions. The situation that we have here is that there is an existing crossover on this property. And the reason that matters is that we are being asked to remove a tree to facilitate a crossover when the property already has a crossover. In my view, this is a design problem. Design is about responding to constraints. One of the constraints on this property is that there are trees on the verge and that they will prevent a crossover from going in the location that the proponent is seeking unless the tree is removed. Now, design constraints do not necessarily have to be a bad thing. Responding to design constraints can lead to really interesting and excellent design responses. I think we need to be more robust about saying that where there is a design possibility, where this can be overcome by a different design, we should be very hesitant to be removing street trees in favour of a different design solution. And this goes for ourselves as well. We are later going to consider going out to the public for proposals in relation to city-held land. That land does have trees on it. We will need to ensure that we hold ourselves to the same standard and that we insist on design solutions that retain trees wherever possible and do not remove trees unnecessarily. I think here, while I accept that this is the preferred option that the proponent has requested, it just strikes me that it is difficult for me to justify removing a good and healthy and vigorous tree because this is the preferred design solution as opposed to some other design solution. So for that reason, I agree with the officer's recommendation to refuse removal of the street tree. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Whitland. Okay, you'll speak later. Is there a speaker against? Councillor Edinger.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to start out by just correcting some of the statements Councillor Fitzgerald said. Ms Reinhardt was actually born in Perth and she went to St Hilda's. She grew up in Western Australia. Yes, and Mr McGowan was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, and went to the University of Queensland, which might be what you're alluding to. I'd also like to state that I lived in Queensland for 4.5 years, which I loved, and I'd move back to Brisbane tomorrow if I could cope with the humidity. So, moving on. Look, I'm known for my green leanings, and I have to say, when I had the site meetings with officers and the Mayor and Councillor Barber, I spoke quite animatedly in support of the proponent's proposed solution to putting a driveway in past the tree so that the tree could be supported. They were proposing an innovative mesh driveway. It's a trafficable driveway. They use stuff called hill guard, which is widely used in public trafficable areas. But the city would not come at it, as Mr Bird alluded to last week, because they considered the proposed crossover material could be a trip hazard, which I voiced my opposition to that, and they just really didn't care, but anyway. And they were worried about a tree being hit by vehicles, which I also raised my eyebrows at, and they said people backing out might have problems because the proponent was proposing to have the driveway about 200 mils, so 20 centimetres narrower than what the driveway should be. Our policy says driveways should be 3 metres, not must be or will be, should be. So there is some wriggle room in that, and they said that could cause people problems. And I thought, if you can drive out and back out of any parking area like Garden City, Westfield Burragoon, Melville Plaza or Bull Creek Shopping Centre, if you can back out there without having an accident, you can back out of a driveway like that without having an accident. So for those reasons, I was really hopeful that the city might see reason and actually let these people put their alternative driveway in. But no, they weren't. And these people, they have designed their house so that they can take advantage of the views over the road to Wireless Hill, and that it is solar passive, so they'll have northern sun coming into their courtyard and into their private space and heating their house in winter. I'm assuming they've done it for the winter sun and protecting it from the sun in summer. So the tree could have stayed, but then last weekend the proponents came and did that last week, gave their deputation where they said they are comfortable with having the tree removed and that they would put in 2 trees to replace it. They said there's a rubber tree they live on a corner, so around the corner there's a rubber tree which is adjacent to the not very wide existing crossover, and that they would put trees in to fill that. So these people, they are wanting to support our environment by planting more trees. So the removal of this one tree will result in more trees being planted than are there at the moment. So yes, it's not often I support the removal of the tree, but in this case, I think it is for the best. It will allow these people who've put time, effort and money into getting a fabulous house designed. I just love the design of it. And it will add to the streetscape. It will add to the value of the area. The GRV will probably make them pay more rates, so the city will benefit as well. So for these reasons, I believe we should vote against the motion. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Edinger. I'm looking for a speaker, for. Have we got another speaker against? Yeah. Did you want to speak now? Okay, thank you, Councillor Wheatland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just want to be really clear. The community's been very loud on tree removal, very, very, very loud. And our residents expect us to not only protect our healthy verge trees, but some actually want us to make it compulsory to have a verge tree. We've got something coming to the Policy and Legislation Committee about that soon, or in the near future. And they certainly don't support removals of trees driven purely by design choices. I've had many residents over the years come to me with design problems with small blocks in Willagee, where they spent all their money to get the block and to get a house that they wanted for their family, and to request that a tree be removed so they could put their driveway in the said spot. But after liaising with the planning department, they changed their design and they built it, much to the, the expensive cost to themselves. And these are people that probably nearly went broke trying to get that house in that area. And people value their street trees. They add value to the house. They're an asset. They can be added to the asset. Are they valued in the asset register? Yes. They cool our neighbourhoods, support biodiversity and make our suburbs feel like home. And we have a responsibility to listen and uphold these values. The Queensland box tree at this site is a mature and healthy tree. I haven't personally inspected it like others have here, but I did do a drive-by. It makes a significant contribution to the streetscape. There's nothing wrong with the tree. There's no disease. There's no safety risk. What threatens a tree is a double width driveway, which is a design decision. It's not necessarily necessary.
I'm sorry, it's a single width driveway. It's a 3 metre driveway.
3 metre, sorry. I didn't, I had that crossed out actually. Tree policy is clear that verge trees are public assets, and removal is only supported when no reasonable alternative exists, and in this case there are alternatives. The DA approval for this property did not include approval to remove this tree. And we've made a firm commitment as a city to increase canopy and protect public greenery. I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I think I've not yet voted for the removal of a tree. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure with my track record that that is the case. That means standing firm in cases like this where the design is beautiful, and it is in a beautiful location. It is solar passive. It is facing the beautiful Wireless Hill across Jägermeyer across the road. We're not anti-development, but we are certainly pro-urban canopy and listening to the community over and over again, protecting our verge trees, and we are definitely pro-sustainability. So I think removing this tree for the purpose of a crossover would be the wrong call, and it would send the wrong message out there to the community. So I ask you to consider these points when you're voting on this matter. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against? Thank you, Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I'm pro-trees too, as is Councillor Edinger. But in this instance, and I think we should look at every case from its unique value, I believe these landowners have done the right thing. They've currently got 8 trees on their property, 8 huge trees. If we remove one box tree, there's another box tree 6 metres west, still on their property. And I'm surprised Councillor Fitzgerald didn't do his homework, and McGowan and Reinhardt are not Queenslanders, but I am a Queenslander. So I'm quite keen on the Queensland box tree. It's nice to know it tolerates smog. Nice to know it doesn't drop limbs, but it does drop a lot of nuts. And that's possibly why 12 out of 13 neighbours in the community voted to have it gone. That's the community around that property. 12 out of 13 neighbours agreed to the removal of the tree. Now, who didn't want the tree removed were the owners themselves. The actual owners, as Councillor Edinger pointed out in their initial design, actually wanted to have a driveway that went around the offending tree, but our natural environment people said no, they couldn't do that for the reasons Councillor Edinger said. It was too close to the tree, and you would have had to build a retaining wall which would have prevented a footpath being built. So they actually didn't put the DA to remove the tree because they wanted to put this special driveway around it. So these people actually have done the right thing in all facets of the design. The Queensland box is an introduced species, as I've already said. Look, it's nice, it tolerates smoke, but the owners have said they'll put in 2 native trees to Western Australia, which will increase the tree canopy. It's not I don't think I've ever voted against a tree either, but I just look at this property and my hat goes off to these owners. They're going to keep all the trees. It's not a block where they're going to flatten everything. They're keeping 7 of the 8 trees. They want this 1 tree removed. They're going to add 2 trees. I just think it's a win-win, and we should look at each situation in its unique entirety. This process, 6 trees in this process have been brought to council. 4 we've agreed to remove, and 2 have been retained. So it doesn't come to council very often. This is fairly unique that this has come to council. Councillor Edinger and I have had a really good look. I've spoke to the city officers, and look, they quite understand. I ask you, in this instance, the community, yes, want us to keep tree removal. They want us to increase our canopy, but I see that we are increasing our canopy in this situation. And so I'm asking you to vote against, in this case, the officer request. In this case, and as the Mayor has flagged, I have got an alternative motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Fitzgerald to wrap up unless there's a number of speakers on each side to continue. If there's not, Councillor Fitzgerald, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I stand corrected in relation to Ms Reinhardt's place of birth. I made a complete error there, and I hope I haven't unfairly maligned her as a Queenslander. The point, I think, in relation to the property, however, is that this is a question of a design consideration. There is an existing crossover, and while I accept, as Councillor Barbara has pointed out, that there is a strong attempt by the proponents to make other arrangements, the reality is that design is always able to be varied. There is always another design solution. I'm also slightly wary of the argument that, well, there are 8 verge trees, therefore it falls to us that we could remove one of those, because, again, we are at a fairly desperate point with regard to our tree canopy. We are fighting very hard to stop from going backwards, and it is appropriate, I think, to draw a line in the sand and say wherever there is an opportunity to not have a tree removed, we should avoid having that tree removed. And I think it is clear that here this is not a necessary tree removal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. All right, we'll proceed to the vote now. Yes, this is to support the officer recommendation, exactly. So green is for support for the officer's recommendation, red is for against. That is carried 6-5. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to E2568, response to petition Burke Drive traffic calming strategy. Councillor Barber will be leaving the room. All right, so can I have a mover and seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Edinger, and seconded? Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wheatland. Okay, Councillor Edinger, do you wish to open the debate? Is there any, can I ask, is there any, anyone opposed to this officer recommendation? Yes, you have a question. Okay, can we take the question?
I just, following on from previous discussions, I just would like to have clarity on whether the investigation will include all forms of traffic calming and whether there will be, whether the intention is to go to speed bumps as a default.
Mr McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your question, Councillor Woodall. As mentioned at the ABF, we'll be looking at all options in accordance with the recommendation, and consideration will be to looking at other traffic calming measures that are suited to this location, and that may not involve the installation of speed plateaus or speed humps to achieve that.
Did you have a question, Councillor Spanbrook?
I do, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Mr McCarthy, that can it also be considered because of the I'm just trying to think what they're called, the cyclist incidents, that can also be included a potential for a cycling lane? Thank you.
Mr McCarthy.
So thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Spanbrook. Yes, we'll be looking at the cycling movements in that area. There is a PSP within the Foreshore Reserve that is used. There's also pelotons that use the road. So we'll look at whether it is viable to include a cycle lane within Burke Drive, and that could actually result in some traffic calming, but we'll just have to look at what the study comes up with and how the consultation is gone with the various stakeholder groups.
All right, okay. Are they questions or are you questions? Oh, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for Director McCarthy. I was just wondering, is this comprehensive traffic study, would you say, is it comparative to other studies that have been undertaken in other areas around the city that you can recall?
Mr McCarthy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks you, Councillor Green. So we did look at quite in-depth study of Bombard Street and surrounding roads as part of looking at traffic calming there and access issues in regards to the school and the congestion in that area. This one has got some minor speeding of the 85th percentile, so it's worth investigating how to get the speeds down to acceptable levels. So that will be looked at as part of the investigation.
Thank you, Mr McCarthy. Councillor Lee, is that a question? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. I remember the place used to be a driving range, practicing golf, and there were a couple of food vans. in the station around there. So with this calming strategy, are you going to bring back those, the golf, and it's been very popular, the golf and the couple of food vans? I'm not sure where they've disappeared to. So can you comment on that?
Is that actually part of this traffic study, Mr McCarthy?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I don't really think that's in the scope of the traffic study. The area has occasionally been used for pop-up vans serving coffee and other things for the dog park users. I think the golf was removed over a decade ago because of safety concerns, both for people using the reserve and for vehicles travelling along Burke Drive. So I'd say that's probably not an effective traffic control device there.
Thank you, Mr McCarthy. Okay, have all the questions finished? Now, is there anyone who opposes? Is there an opposing voice to this recommendation?
I actually have a question.
Councillor Edinger.
I'm just wondering if someone would move that a definite date be put in as item number 5.
Well, you can request that yourself. Yes, and we'll find out if your seconder is agreeable. So what date would you like to put in there?
I was thinking March next year, given that there's elections and then we have Christmas and then we have lots of public holidays.
Mr McCarthy, what is could you have some assistance here with helping with a date?
So thank you, Madam Mayor. Just clarifying, Councillor Eden, so what are you saying, starting the investigation later or reporting back by March? I would have to look into that. I'm not exactly sure.
April or May.
So the consultation will be the things that takes time, but my understanding is that the traffic study was planned to be completed, including the consultation toward the end of 25-26, so that any costs associated with traffic calming measures could be scoped and included for the 26-27 budget.
So maybe April 2026 for the report?
Mr McCarthy, would that be a reasonable time frame? April 2026?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So my suggestion is rather than amending the recommendation to include that as a definite time frame, I can take the concerns back to the group with a view of doing our best to get a report to the council by April or May 2026.
My preference would be to put April 2026 in, and then if you can't make that date, you can advise council.
Would perhaps May be a better time? May.
Oh, May, okay. May 2026. Okay.
And that would be just towards practically at the end of the financial year, and I'm sure the officers could do something before then.
Okay, thanks.
Would that be acceptable? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Wheatland, would you find that acceptable? Yes. You'd be happy with that?
Sorry, I'm just
Councillor?
wondering about how that fits in with the black spot funding approval process, assessment and all that sort of stuff.
Mr McCarthy, could you advise us on that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the black spot funding, I understand, has a number of rounds, so they can be applied for, but also there could be a lag time. So depending on when we apply, when we get the funding, how that coincides with the 26-27 financial year may have some bearing on when we would start the project, but that would happen with most of these projects where there are sufficient crashes to indicate that you would be eligible for black spot funding. So for the city's perspective, it's not a huge amount of roads where we would be eligible for black spot funding. Most of those have already been catered for, or applications to do improvements haven't been supported by main roads. So I think this one would be well positioned to get funding in that regard.
Well, there's just a bit of a problem. I'm going to ask Head of Governance to talk you through this because there's no particular location for it. So, Ms Newman, if you could assist us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, the current officer recommendation as it stands doesn't actually talk about bringing back a report to the council. It looks to do a traffic study, do a community engagement, and then progress to the detailed design. So when you're talking about it coming back, is that before the detailed design or after? So there's no clear
after,
space
yes, after,
to pop those dates into.
yes, after the detailed design.
And Mr McCarthy, would that work after detailed design? We didn't clarify that at the beginning.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Edinger. I would doubt whether we would be able to get a concept or consultation, concept design, a cost estimate from that, gain agreement on going forward with that, where we'd probably take something to an EMES and then do a detailed design as well. So that could squash the timeline and potentially push the project out to the 2027-28 financial year if we are going to be able to put a detailed design within that time frame.
So you're suggesting that the May 26 is probably not a realistic timetable from what you have to achieve. Would that be what I'm understanding?
So through you, Madam Mayor, so a lot of the work will be done around consultation, not only with stakeholders but also state agencies. There is a principal shared path there, so Department of Transport would be interested in how we deal with that, obviously main roads as well. We would have to talk to the various cycling groups. There's also quite a lot of users down there along Burke Drive in terms of the dog park, sporting clubs and the like. So it's probably the consultation is going to take up more time, and I was contemplating that we would have the results of consultation, some ideas around designs for that, and a concept that we could bring to council for consideration of the 26-27 budget, and that we then could get funding to do a detailed design and hopefully start construction that year, or could be later if we are dependent on receiving black spot funding.
Councillor Woodall, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just going to suggest that perhaps just, I think, as Mr McCarthy has alluded to, perhaps just item 1 could come back to council by May 2026 with the various options, and then the rest can progress after that.
I'm happy with that.
You're happy with that? Mr McCarthy, that would be satisfactory?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that timeline would be achievable.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Wheatland, you're happy with that as well? Okay, so that's now in there. Can we just... Yes, please check the correct wording. It's now been put on the screen. Okay, so is there any voice opposed? Anyone opposed to this? If the Councillor Spanbrook, is that a question?
Sorry, Madam Mayor. I know that there will be an EMIS prior to coming to the OMC. Does that need to be stipulated or it's just a given? Thanks.
Ms Bowman, CEO, will respond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Spanbrook. No, that's just a given. Now we've built into our processes that most items that are coming to council will go to an EMES first. Thank you.
Okay, is there any opposition? If there is none, I'm declaring this carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Barber can now return to the room. I think she heard me. Yes, she's on her way. Okay, moving on to item UP 2566, review of local planning policy 1.9, height of buildings, and local planning policy 3.1, residential development. Can I please have a mover and seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor Fitzgerald moved. Seconder? Can I have a thank you, Councillor Edinger. Right, is there anyone opposed? If there's nobody opposed, I declare this carried. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is UP 2559 or 69. Local Planning Policy 1.1, Planning Processes and Decision Making. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Edinger moved. Councillor Woodall seconded. Is there anyone opposed? I declare this carried. We're now moving on to item 15, motions with previous notice. There are no motions with previous notice for discussion this evening. Item 16, motions without previous notice. There are no motions without previous notice for discussions this evening.
Madam Mayor, I believe there were two motions that were pulled from the on-block items that need to be dealt with.
Yes, we're just looking at that at the moment. We're going to... does anybody want to discuss the confidential attachments at all? Because if you do, we'll go behind closed doors. If there is no interest in doing that, I will just take a mover and seconder and we can continue with it in this forum. Okay, so we're going on to item C25 269 410 Canning Highway, Atterdale, commercial optimisation investigation. So can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded. Councillor Barber. Is there any opposition? I declare this carried. Moving on to the next item, C25 270 788 794 Canning Highway, Applecross, commercial optimisation investigation. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded. Councillor Barber. Is there anyone opposed? I declare that carried. Now we're moving on to item 17, matters for which the meeting was closed to the public. We're moving on to confidential item that we have for this evening. So I need a motion from the floor to move behind closed doors. So can I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Woodall moved, seconded Councillor Spanbrook. Is there anyone opposed? All right. We don't need to debate, do we? No. Do we take a vote? All right, so we'll go to the vote on that particular item. So we're voting on going behind closed doors. If you agree, you're voting green. If you disagree, you're voting red. Thank you. Carried 10-1. We're now going behind closed doors and we'll wait a moment for the streaming to be turned off. The meeting is now resumed. Item 18, decisions made while meeting was closed to the public. For the purposes of the minutes, item C25-272 was discussed behind closed doors and the officer recommendation was carried. 19, closure. Now, there are no councillors online in attendance, so there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed at 8:55 p.m. Thank you for your attendance.